The town of Tukwa was a land of both wealth and want, where fortunes were measured not in kindness, but in gold and power. At the heart of the market, near the towering baobab tree that had stood for generations, an old beggar sat, his presence barely acknowledged by the hurrying feet of passers-by. His name was Ndibe, though few cared to know it. Wrapped in tattered robes that had long surrendered to dust and time, he sat in silent observation, his face hidden beneath a weathered hood. Before him lay a worn-out calabash, its once vibrant carvings now faded, the relic of a past long buried. Unlike the other beggars who stretched trembling hands toward the wealthy, pleading for alms, Ndibe spoke only in riddles and proverbs. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of forgotten wisdom. "A river does not boast of its depth. It simply swallows the proud," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the swirling crowd before him. Most who passed saw only a broken man, just another beggar, too weak to work, too old to matter. They did not see the sharp glint in his eyes, the quiet storm brewing beneath his stillness. Not everyone ignored him, though. Among the town's privileged youth, there was one who found amusement in the presence of the silent beggar. Zuberi, the arrogant son of a wealthy merchant, led a band of troublemakers who roamed the marketplace like hyenas, searching for sport. With silk robes embroidered in foreign patterns and gold rings on his fingers, Zuberi moved through Tukwa as though the town belonged to him, and Ndibe, sitting so still, so unmoved, was his favorite target. "Look at him," Zuberi scoffed, tossing a coin at the beggar's feet. "Too proud to beg properly, yet too weak to be anything else." His friends snickered, nudging each other as they watched. Ndibe did not move, did not reach for the coin as the others might have. He simply sat, watching, waiting. Zuberi did not like to be ignored. "Perhaps he doesn't hear well," he said, grinning. He crouched before Ndibe, picking up the coin and holding it out. "Is this not what you want, old man?" The beggar's hands remained folded in his lap. His hood barely shifted as he exhaled slowly. Zuberi's smile faltered. He hated the way this beggar sat there, unbothered, unaffected. With a flick of his wrist, he let the coin drop into Ndibe's calabash. The dull clang of metal against wood was swallowed by the market's noise, and still, no reaction. The game of humiliation continued for days, each encounter worse than the last. Zuberi and his band tossed more coins, laughing as Ndibe refused to scramble for them. They mocked his robes, his silence, his very existence, and still Ndibe sat, his patience unshaken, his gaze steady. But there came a day when the line was crossed. That afternoon, as the market thrived with life, Zuberi and his friends approached the beggar once more. But this time, Zuberi did not come with coins. He came with a bowl of steaming stew, rich, thick, and fragrant, the kind of meal that could satisfy hunger in a single bite. He knelt before Ndibe, holding the bowl between them, the scent curling into the beggar's nostrils. "You must be hungry," Zuberi said, voice dripping with mockery. "Go on, take it." Still, Ndibe did not move. Zuberi's smile twisted, and before anyone could stop him, he tilted the bowl, letting the thick stew spill over Ndibe's lap, staining his robes in oil and shame. Laughter erupted around them. Some villagers gasped, others turned away, unwilling to intervene. But Zuberi was not finished. Snatching the calabash, he raised it high above his head. "Let's rid him of this filth," he declared. The calabash shattered against the cobblestone, the broken pieces scattering at Ndibe's feet. A hush fell over the marketplace. Even the traders, once too busy to care, now watched in silence. From the fruit stall, Mama Chiku, the old woman who had seen many seasons pass, tightened her grip around her wooden staff. Her gaze, sharp as a hawk's, fixed upon the scene before her. "Fools mock what they do not understand," she murmured, shaking her head. She had seen such cruelty before, and she knew well that fate had a way of balancing the scales. But it was what happened next that sent a shiver through the watching crowd. Ndiba, the beggar they had all ignored, did not curse, did not rage, did not even flinch. Instead, he smiled. Slowly, with deliberate hands, he gathered the shattered pieces of his calabash, one by one. He cradled them as though they were precious, as though they still held worth. Then, without a single word, he rose and walked away. A silence heavier than thunder settled over the marketplace. For the first time, Zuberi felt something gnaw at his chest, something unfamiliar, something uncomfortable. He had won his game, and yet as he watched the beggar disappear into the crowd, he felt no triumph, only foreboding. Ndibe was not just a beggar, nor was he the frail, broken man the people of Tukwa believed him to be. Beneath the layers of dust and tattered robes lay the shadow of a man whose name once commanded both awe and envy. His true name was Kwaku Ndibe, a man who once sat atop an empire of wealth and power, a name that had echoed through the corridors of commerce across the land. Years ago, he had ruled the world of trade, a merchant prince whose gold could buy entire villages. But where there was wealth, there was also treachery. Greed had slithered into his own household, poisoning the hearts of those closest to him. Betrayal, sharp as a viper's fang, had come not from strangers but from his own blood. Kin who once shared his table, his laughter, and his trust. When they sought to destroy him, they did not do so with swords or poison, but with whispers and ink, false accusations, forged documents, a web of deceit so masterfully woven that even the elders, blinded by silver, turned against him. His vast riches were seized, his name stripped of honor, and his allies scattered like dry leaves before a storm. Rather than fight for the wealth that had betrayed him, Kwaku Ndibe had walked away. He chose the path of the unseen, stepping into the very shadows where the forgotten souls of the world dwelled. He discarded his fine robes for rags, his palace for the streets. But this was not an act of defeat. No, it was something far greater. He had forsaken fortune to test the hearts of men. He had walked among them, not as a prince, but as a beggar, watching as the world revealed its true face to him. And in the town of Tukwa, he had seen the ugliest of truths. Wealth was a shield for the wicked, and justice was a luxury for the powerful. But now, the time for watching was over. The storm was coming, and those who had mocked the beggar would soon learn the weight of his name. The drums of Tukwa thundered through the open square, calling the people to the great festival. The air was thick with the scent of roasted maize and spiced meats, mingling with the sweet aroma of ripe mangoes piled high on woven trays. Women in vibrant kitenge dresses swayed to the rhythm, their laughter ringing through the marketplace as men clapped and stomped their feet in time with the music. Woven banners of deep red and gold fluttered from the wooden stalls, their bright colors reflecting the wealth and grandeur of the occasion. At the heart of the square, a high dais overlooked the crowd. Seated upon it was Chief Wazuri, draped in fine robes, his gold-lined staff resting beside him. By his side sat Zuberi, his son, adorned in the finest silk, his arms heavy with ivory bangles. Together they surveyed the festival with the satisfaction of men who held the world in their hands. "The people feast, yet they do not know," Zuberi murmured, a smirk curling his lips. "After tonight, half of them will have no homes left to return to." Chief Wazuri chuckled, raising his bejeweled goblet. "Let them dance while they can. By morning, Tukwa will belong to me, alone." Across the square, the poor huddled in silence, their eyes wary despite the festivities. They had heard the whispers of land stolen, of homes lost, and of the merchants who had vanished after daring to speak against Wazuri. But none dared to act, not when power belonged to those who sat upon the high dais. Then the festival's rhythm faltered. The drummers hesitated, their hands hovering over the stretched hides of their drums. A hush rippled through the crowd like dry leaves before a storm. From the far end of the square, a convoy of carriages emerged, their wheels rolling over the dust-laden ground with an eerie, deliberate grace. The horses that pulled them were unlike any the people of Tukwa had seen before, black as midnight, their manes braided with golden threads. The carriages themselves shimmered under the lantern glow, their surfaces adorned with intricate carvings of great warriors and ancient kings. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Who dares enter with such display? Wazuri sat up, his fingers tightening around his goblet. Who is this that interrupts my festival? The lead carriage halted, and from within, a figure emerged. Cloaked in robes richer than the night sky, the man stepped forward, his posture regal, his presence commanding. Gold embroidery wove through the fabric, glistening with every movement. Rings of rare stones adorned his fingers, a bracelet of pure jade encircling his wrist. Gasps echoed through the crowd as the hood fell back, revealing the face beneath, the beggar. The beggar who had once sat in rags at the market's edge, whom they had mocked, whom Zuberi had tormented. But this was no beggar. His skin, once dulled by dust and hardship, now bore a deep, healthy glow. His posture, once hunched in humility, was now straight with the strength of kings. Kwaku Ndibe had returned. The silence was deafening. Zuberi's smirk faltered, his fingers clenching around the edge of his seat. Number it cannot be. Wazuri's face darkened, his mind racing through the possibilities, the implications. Ndibe's gaze swept the square, meeting the eyes of those who had ignored him, scorned him, cast him aside as nothing more than a forgotten soul. Then he spoke. I once walked among you in rags. His voice rang clear and powerful, and you turned your faces from me. His words settled over the people, like the weight of an untold truth. Women clutched their children closer, merchants exchanged uneasy glances, and the elders shifted where they stood, suddenly recalling whispered warnings and old proverbs. Ndibe turned his eyes toward the dais, but not all turned away. He continued, his gaze unwavering. There were those who gave with kindness, whose hearts remained uncorrupted. And there were those— His voice dropped, heavy with meaning. Who mocked, who stole, who betrayed. Zuberi's breath quickened. Father, he whispered, we must— But Wazuri raised a hand, silencing him. What do you want, Ndibe? He called out, forcing calm into his tone. You return in finery, yet you speak of betrayal. Why do you disturb my festival? Ndibe smiled, but there was no mirth in it. From the folds of his robes, he withdrew a bundle of papers, sealed with the emblem of distant courts, signed with names that carried weight beyond Tukwa's borders. Because the time for reckoning has come. He unfurled the papers, holding them high for all to see. Here lies the truth of your empire, Wazuri, he declared. Deeds forged with false signatures, lands stolen from the innocent, merchants silenced, not by fair trade, but by threats and violence. A stunned silence filled the square. Then, like the first drop of rain before a downpour, whispers began to spread. The deeds, could it be true? I lost my father's land to Wazuri last harvest. They said the mayor would not intervene, but perhaps he feared. Wazuri's jaw clenched. Lies, he spat. These are forgeries, tricks meant to disgrace my name. Ndibe stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Wazuri's. Then let the elders judge, he said. Let the people decide what is true. The crowd erupted. Voices once timid now rose with fury and demand. The elders, seated in their place of wisdom, exchanged grave looks. The mayor's face turned pale, knowing his own silence had shielded Wazuri's deeds for too long. It was over. As the truth spread, Wazuri's power began to unravel. His allies stepped back, unwilling to be dragged into his fall. His guards, once loyal for coin, now looked to the crowd, gauging where true power lay. The festival, once a stage for Wazuri's triumph, had become the ground upon which his name crumbled. And as the people of Tukwa rose with newfound courage, the chief of greed sat frozen, his hands trembling over the empty throne of his making. The sun hung low over Tukwa, casting golden light upon the faces of those gathered in the town square. The festival's splendor had faded into a hush of expectation. Before them, Kwaku Ndibe stood tall, his robes glinting like embers in the dying light. He did not raise his voice, yet every ear leaned forward, drawn to the weight of his words. "A man's worth," he began, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, "is not in the cloth that drapes his shoulders, nor in the gold that fills his hands. It is in the strength of his heart, the kindness of his spirit, and the truth in his tongue." The people lowered their heads. Many had mocked him, turned their backs on him when he was but a beggar in tattered rags. Now before them stood the same man, unchanged in soul, though wrapped in the riches they once worshipped. "When the storm rises," Ndibe continued, "it does not ask if a man is rich or poor. When the sun shines, it does not choose one roof over another. So why, then, do men measure each other in gold and silk?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The elders nodded in deep reflection, while the young whispered among themselves, realizing the weight of their folly. At the edge of the square, a woman stepped forward. Her back was bent with age, her eyes sharp with wisdom. It was Mama Chiku. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice carrying the wisdom of generations. "Ndibe speaks the truth," she said. "For too long, we have placed our trust in those who hoard wealth, forgetting that true riches lie in the hands of those who build, those who heal, and those who serve." A silence fell over the square, heavy with realization. Then something changed. One by one, the villagers who had once shunned the poor turned toward them. A merchant reached into his satchel and handed a loaf of warm bread to a frail woman at his side. A fisherman who had always walked past the beggars on his way home knelt to offer dried fish to a hungry child. The walls that had once divided them, wealth and status, pride and shame, began to crumble. A call rose among the elders, voices entwined in the wisdom of age. "Tukwa must not remain as it was," declared one. "We must choose leaders who listen to all, not just to those who sit in luxury." "The council must change," said another. "We have seen what happens when power belongs only to the few." The people nodded, their hearts awakened to a truth they had ignored for too long. In the midst of the gathering, Zuberi stood alone. His fine garments no longer made him untouchable. The men who had once walked proudly at his side had drifted away, leaving him to face the weight of his own reflection. The whispers of the people clung to him like shadows, but for the first time, he did not turn away. He let them settle upon his skin, let them sting. With slow, deliberate steps, he walked toward Mama Chiku. The elder woman did not flinch as he knelt before her, his once proud head bowed low. "Teach me," he said, his voice raw with humility. "I have worn the robes of a prince, but carried the heart of a fool. I wish to learn what it means to serve, to lead with honor instead of fear." Mama Chiku studied him. Where once she had seen arrogance, now she saw the glimmer of something new, understanding, perhaps even regret. She nodded. "Very well," she said, "but know this, true leadership is not in ruling over men, but in lifting them up." From that day forward, Zuberi labored beside the villagers. His hands, once soft from luxury, grew calloused from work. He built homes for the displaced, carried water for the weary, and listened to the stories of those he once scorned. The transformation was slow, but the people saw it. And though their whispers did not cease, their scorn turned to cautious respect. As for Ndibe, he did not wait for praise. That night, as the village slept, He slipped into the shadows, leaving behind only a single message, carved into the wood of the town square. The rain falls on the rich and the poor alike. When morning came, the people found his words, but not the man. Some said he had vanished into the wilderness, returning to the unknown. Others whispered that he still walked among them, unseen but ever watchful. What was certain was this: the town of Tukwa had changed. The once forgotten beggars now walked with dignity. The merchants no longer measured wealth by what they could hoard, but by what they could share. The council, once ruled by greed, now belonged to the voices of the people. One evening, as the village gathered to share their stories, an old man sat upon the steps of the square. His voice, thick with memory, wove a tale of a man who had walked among them, testing their hearts, revealing their truths. "Gold fades," he said. "Power crumbles. But a man's character, that is the only thing that time cannot wash away." And so, the people of Tukwa remembered, not just the beggar who became a prince, but the lesson he left behind. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, what lesson did you take away from this story?